All right, remember we said somewhere near the beginning of the semester that if you don't understand anything about the history of a religion, it's going to be difficult to understand the religion. There is no religion in which this is more true than Hinduism. I mean, it's true in Christianity, it's true in all of them, but you really need to have some understanding of what happened on the continent, or in that part of the continent of Southeast Asia, if you're going to get a grasp on what Hinduism is. And let's just say right up front that Hinduism is extremely complex and very difficult to nail down. And as we talk about the history, that'll become obvious, but let me just say this. Part of the reason for that is because India never intended to be a country, all right? India was a collection of a variety of religious belief systems, cultures, languages, and according to some historians, they were all peacefully coexisting. Well, human nature would probably convince us otherwise. I mean, maybe compared to other collections of tribal peoples, they were. But the fact of the matter is, they never intended to be collectively identified as a country called India. That is an imposition that came as a result of British influence, colonialism, and, commerce in the country of India. You've all heard of the East India Company, and there were other countries as well that made their stakes, including Portugal, and we'll look at a little spot in India where where a Portuguese settlement was especially influential. So with that, let's take a look. In terms of age, I mean, it doesn't get much older than Hinduism, and these are all kind of estimates. But you can see that Hinduism is reputed as one of the oldest of the major religious groups, 4,000 years old, or going back to 2000 BC. Now, give me some biblical context. What's happening in biblical history around 2000 BC? More specifically, about 2100 BC. Who? That's 1400, so 1445 is normally considered the date of the Exodus, although they were there for 400 years, but that's still only 1800 BC. 2100 would take us back to about the time of Abraham. So, you can see that Hinduism is back right around the time of Abraham. Now, Abraham came out of Ur of the Chaldees, which is not far from, but also not close to India. There, we'll see on a map later the proximity. You can't talk about Hinduism without bringing up this infamous character, or some would call him famous, Mahatma Gandhi. That's not his real name. Mahatma is actually a title. And it means great souled, S-O-U-L-E-D, or great master, that sort of a thing. It's a title that was given to him. Gandhi, have you guys studied Gandhi in other courses in high school or anything? You never? Okay, a world leader, just the importance of what he did, what he fought for is significant in Southeast Asia, and it really made an impression on the whole world. We don't have time to go into the life of Gandhi. This isn't a biography of great leaders. But in a nutshell, Gandhi tried to unite the people of Israel in a peaceful, unification. And he had his work cut out for him because radical Hindus who ended up putting him to death were opposed to the idea of allowing religious liberty and peaceful coexistence among a variety of religious expressions in India. And even to this day, radical Hindus are wanting to unify the entire country under Hinduism as a state religion. It is not a state religion. In fact, there's only one Hindu state religion in the world. Any guesses to what country that might be? It's a smaller country. It's connected to India. North of India, on the northern border. Pardon? Okay, you're in the right area, but it's Nepal. It's Nepal, yeah, right north. Nepal is the only existing country that has a state religion called Hinduism. Okay, and the current leader of India, okay, he is a radical Hindu himself, and his cabinet is basically full of people who would like to make Hinduism the state religion. But there's enough opposition to that I've talked to, for instance, Wesley Chatla, Josh Chatla's father, and I've talked to some others there in India, and there doesn't seem to be any indication this is going to happen tomorrow, or it might not happen at all. But I'm just telling you that this radical Hindus killed Gandhi because he was a peace lover. He believed everybody could get along, and they would have nothing of it. But it's quite a story. Anybody here familiar with the Great Courses? I think I've asked that in other classes. It's the series you can get all kinds of studies from. There's a good course on India and Hinduism among the Great Courses. It's not a Christian approach, but historically there's a lot of good stuff there. And one or two of the episodes there, lectures, deal with the life of Gandhi. I mean, he went to England, he went to Africa, he traveled around quite a bit in order to learn and to strengthen his position. But ultimately, he was overcome by people who were opposed to his move toward peaceful coexistence. Anyway, that's Gandhi, and so, worth studying more. What's the word Hindu mean? Any guesses? I don't expect you to know this, but maybe. The word Hindu actually comes from the name of a major river that runs through North India, more northwest, northwest. And I'll show you that on a map in just a moment. It is a Sanskrit word. And I don't know if the fellows that are coming to teach the linguistics course in January will mention Sanskrit, but it is one of the oldest known, discernible languages on earth today. And so the Sanskrit word is Sindhu, from where we get the word Hindu, and it's the name of a river. Now, why would they name it after a river? Because the history of the nation of India is connected in a very important way to this river. Oh, by the way, let me just show you something else on here. Did you notice that it's a hanging language? The top, the line is at the top, and the letters hang from that. What other language that you know about very well is also a hanging language? The Old Testament was written in Hebrew. Hebrew is also a hanging language. We write from the bottom up. We have our line, we write on the top of our line, but a language like Sanskrit or Hebrew or other Eastern languages are actually hanging languages, which is kind of a fascinating thing to think about. Okay, so there's India, and there is the Indus River. Now here it's spelled Indus, but it's the same one. Okay, I don't know why that thing is.
They're walking around the ceiling to put up that new.
Oh, they're working on the new system. Good. I'm thankful they're getting at it before the snow flies. Okay, so there's a little earthquake going on here in India, but that's the Indus River. And notice that today it serves as a natural border between Pakistan and India. And Emma, you mentioned Bangladesh. Bangladesh, of course, being over on the other side. Both Pakistan and Bangladesh were at one time parts of India. And this is just another little insight for you. There has always been not always, but fairly, for the majority of India's existence as a nation, there's been a strong element of Islam in India. And the Muslims fought for years to have a state that they could call their own. They wanted to have an Islamic state. And so eventually, they were given Pakistan, and this was West Pakistan, and this was East Pakistan, which is now known as Bangladesh. And there were a bunch of civil wars and things that went on, and eventually now you have 3 different countries all bordering on, the 2 of them bordering on India. So there's just a ton of history that is well worth the effort if you have time to read it, because it'll give you a better understanding of why India is what it is today. But that's the river. And there's another shot from a satellite. You can see I don't remember what those dots represent. They're not part of what I was looking for, but that's There's the river. According to most historians, that's the region where the first settlers to that entire area came. And they actually came from the Middle East, from Arab nations. You may notice when you look at Indian people that many of them look very Arab. The color of their skin, their features, and that's partly because many of them originally came from the Middle East. They migrated in that direction. They settled along that river because you had to have a river source to settle, and that's where they settled in. But something happened historically that would change the whole look of the land there. Hinduism began as a collection of many religious traditions in South Asia. How many of you have been to South Asia? Where at, Emma?
Dubai.
Okay, are you all? Have you talked to Kristen Ewan? She was in Dubai last year. You know Kristen? Plays soccer? Yeah, Kristen spent 3 or 4 months in Dubai last year. She was there for the World's Fair, not World's Fair, what do they call that? Pardon? Yeah. And she's our Global Reach Connect coordinator. And you got to talk to her. She would really enjoy interacting with you. Her sister Sharon is also here.
She's my roommate.
Sharon?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're a really neat couple of gals. It is one of the oldest religions in the world with over 800 million adherents. I mean, that's nothing to sneeze at. Now, there are those who would say that India has already passed up China as the world's most populous nation. It's hard to say for sure because when censuses or censi are taken, a lot of times remote tribes are left out because they don't get to them. So I talked to one Indian man who believes that India has already passed China up as the largest country in the world. That's probably a low estimate there, by the way. It's probably closer to a billion or a billion plus. Okay? It is debated whether Western Orientalists or Hindu intellectuals created the term Hinduism. Let me just pull up a website just to show you something about this. This is from Encyclopedia Britannica, and I'm going to make that a little bigger for you. So let's just, oops, that might be a little too big. Let's back that off just a little, and let's get rid of that. All right, I'm just going to read a little bit of this to you. I hope it doesn't bore you. Western scholarly discipline of the 18th and 19th centuries that encompass the study of the languages, literatures, religions, philosophies, histories, art, and law of Asian societies, especially ancient ones. That's what Orientalism is. Now notice, it's Western scholarly discipline. Okay, in other words, these are Westerners who are studying Asia and trying to figure out its history and composition and all that. Do you remember the 2 words we use to describe people who study from within and from without? What do you call somebody who studies a culture from without? Etic, E-T-I-C, and from within, emic, right. So these are etic, this is an etic approach to the country of India. But there are also those who believe that the name actually came from people who were within and studied. So anyway, Britannica is a kind of a neat source. When I'm trying to go to a secular source for information, I'll avoid Wikipedia. They have some good things, but I'll usually try to find something like Britannica. So that's the idea here. Who was it that actually came up with the word Hindu, to describe this country, this culture? Hinduism, as we know it today, before it was known as Hinduism collectively, and nobody knows how many religious persuasions were a part of it. I mean, maybe hundreds of different ones. Now, it appears, and again, there's some speculation here, it appears that even though there was quite a variety of religions, all situated there in that region, that there was some common denominators, and certain gods, and 3 specifically, kind of surfaced and became known as, 3 major gods of the Hindu religion. Again, that's an oversimplification, but we'll get to those 3 later on, okay? So your book says, Hinduism then is a broad term that describes the indigenous religions of India without a particular founder without a single unified history and without a prescribed unified practice of worship. So how in the world do you even call it Hinduism, right? It seems to lack some of the basic building blocks of any religion. Now, be careful, because I may ask on one of the quests, true, false, Mahatma Gandhi is considered the founder of Hinduism. I hope you'll answer false, because he wasn't. Hinduism was around. I mean, he's a guy out of the 50s and 60s. I don't remember exactly what year he died. I remember seeing him live on television. And so, he'd have to be about 4,000 years old in order to be the founder of Hinduism. So don't let that one get you. So this is why Hinduism is kind of hard to nail down when it comes to its actual beginning date and how that all happened. But nonetheless, it is considered today to be a religion. Okay, now remember the river. Here's the Indus River, Pakistan, India, right? Indus Valley civilization, and there are different phases of this. This one traces it back as far as 2600, which would actually be before the time of Abraham, about 500 years prior to Abraham. But again, a lot of these are just guesses. But there is evidence that the civilization that began to develop here was fairly advanced, which shouldn't surprise us. Remember that Abraham came out of Ur of the Chaldees, and archaeological excavations show that Ur was a highly advanced civilization back in the day of Abraham. So here's some pictures of excavation work that's been done in that region. This is along the Indus Valley, the Indus River Valley. And it may not look very advanced to you, but there are some there are some evidences in the way that rooms were built and so on, that there was quite a bit of sophistication. One thing that they note that you don't find in these excavations is some sort of an obvious central place of worship, which may indicate that there wasn't, a unified. Again, it's hard to say for sure. Here's another one in another region. Now, some would suggest that this may depict some sort of a central temple of worship. But I'm just showing you what it may have looked like. If you can imagine the whole thing when it's completely together. Okay, so what happens? Now, I'm just going to tell you that not all historians agree, but probably the predominant theory is the one I'm going to show you here, okay? Just trying to be honest with you. There's just so much to this that it's hard to say for sure. What happened, okay, you have a group of people called the Aryans, and the Aryans were light-skinned people that came more from Europe. Remember I told you that the people who settled along here came largely from Arab nations in the Middle East. But later on, Aryans came from the European part of the world, and something happened when the two of them came together, all right? So changes in the Indus Valley civilization began to be noticeable around 1500 BC. Now, let's think of the Bible again. What's going on around 1500 BC in the Bible? Well, when was the Exodus? One of you mentioned. 1445, so, just right around the time of the Exodus. So in 1500, Israel is still in Egypt, but they're at the end of their 400-year captivity in Egypt, and their liberation is about to take place, okay? It's good to have that point of comparison. The meaning of the word Aryan, it's from the Sanskrit again, that ancient language, and it means noble people. I think I may mention this later, but the Sanskrit language was actually brought to this region by the Aryans. It was their priestly language, okay? So the people that were living along the Indus River did not speak or write in Sanskrit. That was brought to them by the Aryans. And again, there's a debate about the Aryan intrusion. When they came, what happened? Some think that there was a military invasion. The Aryans came in and just, basically, wiped out or scattered them, so they had to run. The problem with this theory is that archaeologists have failed to find evidence of battles, weapons, and that sort of thing. Usually, when there's been a great conflict, a military conflict, even in the skeletons that they dig up, they find evidence of injuries that are related to warlike activity. And they don't find that here. So it's kind of hard to substantiate the idea that the Aryans just came in and bulldozed them out, militarily. Okay. The other one that I think may be a little bit more palatable is that there was a gradual displacement. These Aryans were taller and stronger people. They were probably, I don't know if they were better educated or not, but they were more sophisticated and perhaps just posed a threat that caused those who had been there to, they were called Dravidians. Let me just write that word down for you. I sat in the home of an Indian pastor several years ago who has done extensive historical studies on this, and man, he really helped me. He would call those early Dravidians, the early ones that settled along the Indus River that came from the Middle East, Dravidians. And then, of course, you have the Aryans who come in. And probably the safer bet is to say that there was, as the Aryans came in, they felt threatened, the other groups, and they ended up migrating to the south and southeast of India, okay, that direction. And so, let me just go back here a second. Yeah, you'll notice that there are several language groups. I mean, each one of those colors represents a language group that can involve a lot of different variations and dialects. Yeah?
Did the Aryans just kind of wander over there? Were they looking for something?
That's what we don't know. There's a lot of blanks that we can't fill in right now. I mean, migration has happened all throughout human history, right? I mean, the first great migration was after the Tower of Babel that God actually instituted himself, right? And so, migrations man has been wandering ever since then, So exactly what drove the Aryans there, what motivated them to come, I don't know. Maybe somebody who has gone deeper into the history of this part of the world can tell you that. But what I want to draw attention to especially is the Dravidian language group, that blue one here. Okay, this is the area. Josh Chatla comes from this area. Bangalore is down here now known as Bengaluru. And there's a huge area there where a lot, probably, this group here probably represents the purest form of those who lived along the river at the beginning, okay? Hindi as a language is spoken more in the north. Down here, Josh Chatla's language is Telugu, and then there's Kannada, and there are other ones. And I mean, some of them speak 3 or 4 or 5 different languages. Yeah.
What's the name of the river?
The Indus River up there. Yep. Indus. So anyway, that's kind of the way the migration took place as a result of the coming of the Aryans. Remember, the Aryans are the ones that brought Sanskrit with them. The priestly idea, in fact, and boy, there's so much here. The whole idea of the Brahmin priests and all that actually was introduced by the Aryans and not by the original inhabitants of the Indus River Valley. Okay? And even the caste system, as we'll see later, was probably a result of the Aryan influence coming in. Before that, you didn't have that. Emma?
You said the Aryan was more like the European.
Yeah. That may be an oversimplification, but they were the lighter skinned. They came from the West. So that would, yeah.
The reason I asked that is we have friends from India, and they said that the southern parts of India are more like Hindu, and the northern are more like Muslim. So I didn't know, how that,
Yeah, the Muslim influence, although a lot of that Muslim influence I think comes later. We're talking really early here, even before, this is like 1500 BC, and Islam isn't even born until 620 AD with Muhammad. So I think that is because of other influences that happened later on in their history. Yeah, but and again, I'm speaking to you as a layman when it comes to the history of India, and your book gives you some stuff. It's fascinating and very complex. Today, Emma, I've been told that as many as 25% of Indian people are Muslim, but I've also read in other places it's more like 8 or 10%. So there are differences. The guy that told me 25% is an Indian pastor who studied it, and it does seem to be more predominant in the north, even though they can be found everywhere. I preached in Bangalore on a city square right in front of a mosque, and I even asked the pastor, "Is this okay? And he says, oh yeah, he says, before you come, I said, I'm not going to put you in danger. He said, I actually go around to the people in the city and I tell them what we're coming here to do and make sure it's okay with them. And he actually talked to I don't know if he talked to the imam himself, but some of the leaders in the mosque to make sure it was okay that we did that. And they said it was. But right in the middle of my message, the call to prayer comes. Blah, 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 blah. You know, that kind of made my hair stand up. But he said, don't worry, we're good. So, but yeah, I think you're right. I think that the greater pocket of Islamic influence is in the north.
And I don't know if it's true. That's just what I was told by them.
Yeah. Yep. And I think that's right. But the Muslim influence is everywhere in the country. Yeah. So here, just looking at the Dravidian language family, those are the ones, remember, that came originally from the Middle East. They're like 73 languages. You know, that for Americans, and we think of English, and Spanish, and maybe throw in some, what else, some other languages, but 73 spoken by over 22 million people, mostly in southern India. That's a lot of language groups. But again, most of these people speak more than one. Americans are one of the very few that are pretty much monolinguistic. That's not a slam on Americans. We just haven't had to. Most people are bi or trilingual because they have to be. So it's a question of necessity. Like, oh, I want to learn another language. No, they have to because of interaction with family and neighbors close by. India has 22 official languages. According to the Census of India, I don't remember what year, but recently, the total number of mother tongues spoken in India is 1,652 mother tongues. Now, the size of some of those is probably very small, the number of people who speak a lot of those languages. Do you remember out here on the monitor, we asked the question, how many languages are spoken in the world? And Marcus barely beat out Paul Farlow in getting that right. The estimates say around 7,000 or just a little more, okay, in the whole world. 1,652 just in India. Just mind-boggling. However, only around 150 have a sizable speaking population. So again, how many speak those other variations, I don't know. But still, even 150 having a sizable population is an incredible, mind-boggling figure. It's not part of our reality. Okay. And you've all heard of yoga, right? How many of you have a workout app? I have the Nike Fit app. And, you can find yogic exercises, which, physically speaking, they're very good exercises, But yoga is a Sanskrit word as well. It means union. And Lord Shiva, who is one of those three gods that kind of emerged as central gods in the Hindu religion, is associated with that. You can see him sitting in a yogic position. And I just put a few little things that were discovered up here, as well. But okay, now I want to at least begin talking about the Vedic religions, okay? The word Vedic, guess what language? Sanskrit, okay? It refers to a collection of documents. So there is documentation in the Hindu religion now, and they're called the Vedas. It's a word that comes from the word knowledge, to know. Okay, and so when we talk about Vedic religions, we're talking about religions that have some background in the Vedas. Ancient documents kind of give you the story of Hinduism as we understand it today. So it means sacred knowledge from the Sanskrit. And again, Sanskrit was introduced to the Indus Valley by the Aryans, and Sanskrit itself may be 4,000 to 5,000 years old. In other words, look, this is really weird to think about, but it's possible that Sanskrit, if it's that old, may be one of the languages that God actually created when he scattered the people. I mean, remember we talked about that? When the whole world was one language and God confused their languages, well, where'd those languages come from that they started speaking each other? God gave them to them. God created, just as God created the original language that Adam and Eve spoke before the fall, after the Tower of Babel, God is the one that created the languages that people started speaking in. It's just amazing to think about. All of those are. So if you're having trouble with the language, remember, somewhere along the line, God's the one that gave that, even though they have changed and morphed a lot over the years. The oldest Hindu manuscripts are the Vedas, okay? So they are, what are they? They're liturgies. What is a liturgy? If something is liturgical, what do we mean by that? That's a big word in religions. What is a liturgy? Yeah, right. It's really connected to the priestly office usually, and it's instructions for how to carry on, ritual worship. Exactly. And so a lot of liturgical reading has to do with how people approach the gods. Okay? And that's what the Vedas did in part. I mean, not just that, but they were liturgies. They were guides to how to worship. Okay? And they contain mantras. And a mantra is? Which signify, you're right. It can mean a lot of things nowadays. We've really taken that word and modernized it. Yeah. But originally in this context, they were words that would be used more specifically. Liturgy is the broader term, rituals to worship. Mantras would be almost like a condensation of that. You could have your own personal mantra that would help you to engage in worship, something repeated. Yeah. And now, like I said, we've used that word, even in the secular world, that word is very common nowadays. Yeah. The mantra of faith is with the word of the world. Not really. That's our logo. And then praises, so, like the Psalms, specific praises that were addressed to the gods. And chants, which may be similar to that, but chants may or may not be musical. And then the Aryan priests, who were the real experts in the Sanskrit language and in all this, and the Vedas, they were called Brahmins. So nowadays, what is a Brahmin? When I say the word Brahmin, what comes to your mind? Well, yeah, you're right. In fact, in Brazil, the Brahma is probably the most common cow, the one that has the big hump on the back. Yeah. And that's interesting because what is sacred in India? The cow. So the species of cow, or the, whatever you call it, the brand, it's called I'm not a farmer, it's called a Brahmin. It probably comes from a Hindu context. Very interesting. Brahmin, we'll see more about Brahmin in just a little bit. In fact, we'll do it right now. Okay. Another Sanskrit word that's very important is the word varna. And it's a word that can mean color or class. Now, here's something I really want to make sure you understand when you think about Hinduism. Don't confuse class. Oh, I just realized, students online, I did not give you the right. Oh, I'm so sorry. I apologize to you online students. If you go on, you can find these slides on the home page. My apologies for. Anyway, it's an apology to the online students because I didn't give them the right view here. Sorry about that. Varna can either mean color or class. You've got to understand the difference between class and caste when you're studying Hinduism. What is the difference? We live in a class system here, right? Yeah.
You can move classes, but caste you're born into.
Okay, one of the main differences, once you're born into a caste, you're there forever. I mean, well, not forever, but in this life. Now, if you're reincarnated and you've done a good job with your position in the present caste, you can move up in the next life. If you don't do so well, you may move down. Right. Mm-hmm. And the caste system is also going to determine what kinds of jobs or careers you may be able to get or not. In fact, I don't know if they still do this, but on a birth certificate, at least it used to be the custom in India that the caste you were born in was printed on that birth certificate, and that would determine, if you're applying for a job, that would have an influence on whether you could get hired or not. Okay? So, there's a lot to this. Now, you look at this and you see how many castes? Okay, now at first glance, it looks like 5. But notice that the Dalit term here is actually not included in the triangle. And that's because a Dalit is one that used to be called an outcast. That's where our word outcast comes. They are people who are considered to have not done well in previous lives, and so they are actually cast out of the system. And so outcasts are the ones that are street cleaners, they clean up manure, they do all the really ugly jobs nobody else wants to do for a pittance, and they have to live in their own neighborhoods, and in some extreme cases, if their shadow touches somebody, okay, it's considered, unclean. I mean, now, is some of that changing today because of the influence of globalization? Yes, to some degree, but not completely. The caste system is still very operative in India, very, very operative. I know of one couple that got married, and because she was from a slightly higher caste than her husband, when the two fathers, or future fathers-in-law, met, the father of the bride, the engaged bride, walked up to the other father and slapped him across the face. I talked to this guy personally, the guy that was from the lower caste. And that was that father's way of saying, how dare you, marry. But they got married anyway. It's a long story behind that I don't have time to tell. And over time, that relationship healed, and they ended up getting along fine. But that was an initial statement that guy felt he had to make. Now, here's what you need to understand about the caste system. You see 4 here, right? Okay? But if you ask, I attended a seminar once in Texas, Dallas, Texas, and this guy that lived his life in India was telling us about the caste system. He said there are perhaps as many as 20,000 caste variations in the system. This is obviously a simplification. I mean, you're looking at as many as 5,000 different variations within each caste on the average, right? And he doesn't just finish my statement here. And he said, he looked at everybody, he said, if you think you have the caste system figured out, God have mercy on your soul. That's the way he said, he laughed. Yeah, Cody?
You said that to keep caste and class separate, but this says class, and then we've been talking about this as a caste.
Yeah.
Which one is it and which one is Varna?
Because the word Varna can be translated class, okay? But yeah, but here in this context, in the context of the Indian culture, it is not class as we think of it. That's a good question, right? It's a caste. Okay, so now why this guy behind here? All right, we'll get to that, but there's a belief among at least some Hindus that there was some sort of a primordial, existence of a being that looked like this, had these features, human features, and that the Brahmins came out of his head, the Kshatriyas, the rulers, administrators, and warriors came from his chest area, the Vaishyas, the artisans, tradesmen, farmers, came from his loins, the Shudras came from his feet, his legs, the manual laborers, and of course the Dalits have nothing to do with it. Now, you see, the Hindus aren't the only ones that have used that kind of an image, right, to explain things. I mean, just look at Daniel chapter 2 and the image there, in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And you see the Babylonians and the Medo-Persians and the Greeks and the Romans, also identified with parts of an image body. I mean, it's nothing new under the sun, So anyway, so that's a very, very simplified analysis of the caste system, but within those. That's why when the couple I mentioned to you got married, it wasn't like marrying from here to here. It was probably from here, almost imperceptibly up. But there was a difference. Okay. So the implications of the Varna, the color. Varna may or may not be based on skin color. It's not based on material wealth, although the upper castes seem to have more wealth in general, but it's not. It's who you're born to, whether you're wealthy or poor. Some jobs are not available to lower castes and Dalits, as I mentioned earlier. And it emphasizes purity as a way to liberation. I'm running through this slide really quickly. And so let me just give these to you, and I'm going to come back. I'm going to come back to these on Thursday because there's just more to say about them. But go ahead and write them down, and I will not ask you questions from this, well, the quiz is until next week, so yes, I will. Okay. We'll come back to this slide on Thursday. When you're done, you're free to go. Thank you.